am Melody Smith, Associate Director of Digital and Marketing Communications for the Presbyterian Mission Agency. Thank you for joining us today on Being Matthew 25. In this series, we're counting down to the Matthew 25 Summit, scheduled in January in Atlanta, and we're highlighting a few of the speakers who were key in making this event engaging and innovative. Whether you're already part of the Matthew 25 vision, or you just want to learn more about how to make a meaningful impact on the world around us, this event is for you. Today, we are joined by Dr. William Yu, Associate Professor of American Religious and Cultural History at Columbia Theological Seminary and author of What Kind of Christianity? He's also a minister of Word and Sacrament in the Presbyterian Church USA, and he desires to write, teach, and preach honest narratives of the past, integrating Reformed understandings of confessions and illumination. Dr. Yu will be leading a workshop at the summit called The Role of a Church in a Marred History. When studying the development of Christianity in the antebellum United States, Dr. Yu is motivated to find both beautiful moments of awe-inspiring faith and ugly episodes where it is difficult to discern the divine presence. Dr. Yu is one of those speakers that our guests have cited as someone they are looking forward to hearing from, and I agree. We are honored to have him join us at the summit and here today. Welcome, Dr. Yu.
Thank you, and how may I refer to you?
Melody is fine.
Okay, got it, Melody. Thank you for the invitation. It is good to be talking with you.
We're so glad to have you here. And first, I would like to talk about your book. It feels very timely, the relationship between the Presbyterian Church and slavery after the horrific events of 2020, in light of the Black Lives Matter movement. Is that a reflection of America's painful past living out today, or maybe a forecast of what is to come?
Thanks, Melody. I think it is likely both. I do appreciate you noting my interest in teaching about the church and a marred history. Another way I might put it is I earnestly desire for Christians and all people to engage the fullness of history. In doing so, it may both inspire and infuriate us. I think for me, Melody, and my understanding of both American history as I was taught it and church history as I was taught it, whether it be in congregations or in seminary and the like, it likely emphasized too much of the seeking inspirational lessons and not enough about teaching the fullness of history that might infuriate us, that there were and there continue to be deep injustices, for example, racial injustice and anti-Black discrimination that exists not only in the world and in the nation, but also in some of our churches. So I do think if we can better understand what happened in the past, we can be equipped and engaged to address what is happening in our present. Both the inspiration and the wisdom and the prophetic criticism, if you will, of those abolitionists who said this is wrong, to enslave on the eve of the U.S. Civil War over 4 million Black persons. This is wrong, and this is something that needs to end now. And also what needs to end is our pervasive prejudice against Black people, which exists in white communities, not only in slaveholding states, but also throughout the United States. So in that way, I hope in that addressing that, we can get a better look at the past and a better look at ourselves, not to say that nothing has changed, but to note how things have changed and how we want to continue to promote change in the future.
Thank you. I'm sure when you're sharing this with people, you get a multitude of responses. I'm certain you've encountered angry people, people in denial. But what do you say to people who are ambivalent about the church's history and our involvement in perpetuating slavery?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Melody. I think it reflects an ongoing challenge that is hard for people of faith, including Presbyterian and Reformed Christians, to both admit, confess, acknowledge, and get at is the ambivalence, or it is the not that we don't know, but it's that we don't want to know. This was one of the great challenges to ending the transatlantic slave trade, both in the United States and in England and throughout the Caribbean. This is one of the great challenges to ending slavery in the United States. It was that many people who benefited from and were comfortable with the existing structures, yet they didn't know. But the bigger problem is they didn't want to know. So there was a almost willful, aggressive resistance to really knowing what is happening, to really knowing where is our wealth coming from? Where is the growth of this country coming from? And so similarly, in that regard, Melody, I suppose it's not surprising that there are good people of faith in 2023 who don't want to know, who don't want to engage the fullness of history because it is uncomfortable. And so certainly I've experienced some of that in talking with readers or hearers of presentations I've given about what kind of Christianity. Several responses. I'll just do one and then we can talk together. It is, I will say, for people of color, and in particular for Black and Indigenous Americans and Christians, including Presbyterians and yours and mine, our denomination, that option to not want to know is not there. It was not there and it is not there. Even to have the option is evidence of privilege, right? And so that is the challenge. If we want to be good siblings, if we want to be good partners with all of God's people and with all of the different Christians of color and leaders of color, let alone in the nation, in our Presbyterian Church USA, that's what it would require. It would require giving up on your ambivalence, giving up on your unwillingness to know, even if it is going to be challenging, even if it is going to be risky. Certainly, I will acknowledge for a very few, I don't want to say on all, and I don't want to paint in brush strokes, for some Christians in the era of Black enslavement and slavery, certainly to really know and to really see how Presbyterians and other white Christians were deeply implicated and involved in slavery, it did shake their faith. And for a few, it did cause them, one, to leave the Presbyterian Church for other denominations, but two, to leave the Christian faith because of what they were seeing among Christians, not Christ, but Christians in this country in the 19th century. That is one plausible outcome of a deep reckoning or accounting or understanding of history. And so I have to be honest about that. I'm not saying that's like the broadest, most likely outcome and pathway, but that is one risk. But ultimately, I do think it is through the valley we get to the mountaintop, right? It is in the shadow of the valley of death where we confront evil that our ancestors may have committed or allowed to happen, where we can have a more resilient faith.
Thank you for that. And thank you for the work that you're doing around that. I have heard so many people talk about hearing you speak and listening and reading the book, that it has changed. It has changed their perspective and some conviction in there as well. Your workshop at the Matthew 25 Summit is called The Role of the Church in a Marred History. So that's part of what we're calling the amplifier or the advanced workshops, which mean it's people who have already started down the Matthew 25 journey and they want to dig in a little deeper. So what do you hope for them that the workshop will impress the most? What do you hope that they will take away?
It is to better understand the worst of pro-slavery and anti-Black theologies, such as an appeal to the curse of Ham from 4 verses, I believe, in the 9th chapter of Genesis, to promote the notion of perpetual servitude and slavery for persons of African descent. And so it is to embrace those things and that those theologies happened. Another way related to land dispossession of indigenous peoples is, for example, the doctrine of discovery, which are actually several doctrines from the 15th and 16th centuries. But so it is to get that, and it is to repudiate them and to say that is not what it is to be a Christian. That is not what it is to profess the gospel and to fulfill, for those of us in the PCUSA, I think it's the first page or the first chapter in our polity, in our book of order. It is that the good news of the gospel creates, redeems, sustains, transforms, and rules over all things and all people. And it calls us to proclaim good news to those who are impoverished, freedom or liberty for those who are oppressed, and the like. So it is that, but in addition to the loud sermons that were hateful and wrong, I do hope that we can better also understand the quiet compromises that other people of faith made. Not those who were declaring, because of this curse that happened in Genesis 9, we can continue to practice Black enslavement. But it is the ways in which, it is what Henry Ward Beecher, one of the leading Presbyterian ministers first half of the 19th century. His more famous sibling was Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. But he was pastor for many years. Two congregations. One is Plymouth Church in Brooklyn. The other is, I believe, Second Presbyterian in Indianapolis, Indiana, not too far from Louisville and where the PMA headquarters are. So, but he did admit after the Civil War, he said churches detested or abhorred abolitionism. They hated it. And he acknowledged that there were many brave Christians, Black and white Christians, such as his friend, William Lloyd Garrison, who did oppose abolition boldly and prophetically and risk their lives to do it. But there were less in terms of churches who wanted to embrace and get on with the abolitionist message. So Melody, I hope in this workshop and throughout our study to explain why. Some of it is certainly the sad absorption of hateful theologies, but some of it also really gets at understandings and perhaps misunderstandings of church ministry. I don't want to be uncomfortable in church. For this hour in Sunday worship, I hear all the time in the news about the justice or injustice of the fugitive slave law from 1850. I hear all the time that if this guy Lincoln becomes president, the Union might sever. So when I'm in church, I don't want to have to think about politics. I don't want to have to think about the oppressions that are happening in the world. And at one level, the church is a place for comfort, but at another level, we do want to examine the ways in which we also need to incrementally challenge people of faith in congregations, not in ways that repel, but in ways that resonate and in ways that help people of faith be better educated and better equipped. It is and I'll end with this, I promise, Melody, churches, leaders have not, preachers have not, but churches have really struggled with the paradoxical nature of the gospel. It's a funny thing, Melody, even when I think about it, and maybe you too in our lives, it simultaneously brings us great comfort and discomfort. When we are suffering, the gospel brings us comfort. The metaphorical arms of Jesus hold us close. But at the same time, perpetually the gospel pokes us and makes us uncomfortable and calls us to a better witness, calls us to a more just world, calls us to this thing called discipleship. And I do think that is the paradox that some individuals have gotten, some preachers have preached great about, but that churches together have sometimes struggled and sometimes succeeded in accomplishing that. How do we get our people of faith to simultaneously be comforted and discomforted by the gospel?
Wow. How do I follow that? Since the Matthew 25 vision launched in April of 2019, I have been knee deep in the communications around it. I have been in contact with some of the first churches who signed on, still in contact with churches as we do videos, lifting up how they're living out their Matthew 25 journey. But what I have heard consistently in the last 4 years is that when they choose which one or ones of the 3 issues of Matthew 25 to embrace, that building congregational vitality, that's the easy one. That's the easy on-ramp for them because it's about them, right? Poverty is easy for them because who doesn't want to help the poor? Who doesn't want to help the homeless? Who doesn't want to get health care for the sick? Who doesn't want to feed the hungry? The other one, it's harder for them. Dismantling structural racism isn't an outward project, it is an inward project. And that is really hard for a lot of churches to take on. And I have been impressed and admired by the churches who have chose to do that because they did not see that they could be a vital congregation if they didn't embrace all three of them. So, as that's one of the core three issues of Matthew 25, as you've just outlined, the church can't be an actor in redemption and fight for justice until we look at ourselves and we accept responsibility for our role and how we got here. I think that you've probably answered this in other ways, both in your book and here today. But how would you like to see the church carry out its own call to repentance?
Oh, there are many ways. I think, Melody, I appreciate your reflection about the three principles or convictions, if you will, of the Matthew 25 blueprint, if you will, of poverty, structural racism, and congregational vitality. So it is to encourage people of faith and congregations who are Matthew 25 congregations and leaning into wanting to grow and wanting to fulfill God's call as they understand it, including a call to repentance. It is discerning together how to have hard, sometimes contentious dialogues and conversations and teachings so that churches can be better civic partners and so that individual congregation members can be better civic participants and better understanding what is happening in my neighborhood. What are the issues that are keeping people from the rivers and streams, metaphorically, of justice and righteousness, access, economic, social, spiritual, educational access? And how do we together as a community do that? I think at one level, I understand, and I'll talk about two things. One is, over the past maybe 20 years or so, I think the notion of the purple church, churches that are, and it really is actually, ironically, a political metaphor, even though many of these churches are trying to stay away from politics. It is the notion that we have people who vote red, Republican, and vote blue, Democrat, in our congregation. And so we want to be a congregation that doesn't repel anyone, but that brings everyone together. I do think so. That is one step. I think another step to that is what happens once we bring everyone together? How are we going to model civility? How are we going to model not only necessarily ignoring the hard conversations, but having some of them? It is very difficult. There are few spaces in the United States, sadly, where we can engage in full, hard dialogue about issues of reproductive justice and access, abortion, immigration, and the challenges of what it means to be a nation state and how to keep secure borders and have faithful pathways to legal immigration. Questions about gender and sexuality and identity. These are complicated issues, and there's a lot going on there. And what saddens me sometimes, Melanie, is that I think churches where there's a lot of trust in pastors, trust in ruling elders, trust in deacons, trust in one another, like these are the places where we can have. What do you think is the right age to begin talking about gender identity and fluidity and sexual orientation? Some might say it's 10, some might say it's 5, some might say it's 15, but let's really figure that out and how we can educate together. That's just one of, many myriad of things. So I think you get it, Melody. I think it discouraged me some when churches where you have all that built-in trust and you have this group of people who really do care for one another and care for their neighborhood and care for their country, that they are avoiding some of this work in being a maybe better, more faithful kind of purple church. And so, and the other thing where that leads to, Melody, is I do think that gets at questions of discerning what is faithful civic engagement. And I think it is. And so this is where I've run into, and we'll talk about some, I don't want to say like contentiousness, but I do share in my study of like Presbyterian history and what I think, for example, of Black Presbyterians, it racially integrated worship has never been at the top of the priority list of what they are seeking and what they are wanting a denomination, a presbytery, a synod, or a congregation to do. It is equitable or equal access to education and employment and housing and food and the like, and opportunities for dignity. So these have always been higher on the priority list. But I do sometimes run into some non-Black Presbyterians who really prioritize integrated worship, even let's say it's once a quarter, once a year, or having more people of color in our congregation. That is, I think it's good to have that as a priority, but for some, I see that as the only priority. It is spending what I've shared, 80% of one's time or one's congregation's energy on something that likely is 20% of what is really needed to dismantle structural racism. And I think some of the pushback I get, Melody, is, but we need to be together. We need to understand one another. And I think that's true, but I think there are multiple ways to do that. Sometimes it's less about bringing people in, but having the people who are in to go out.
Yes, exactly. You know, I love worshiping with all types of churches and all different people of different faiths and different walks. But serving the community, working out in the community alongside them, I really feel like you get to know people a little better than just worshiping with them. And I don't mean worship as just as not important, but there's less interaction in worship than there is in serving together and working in the community. So yeah, I really appreciate this time together, and I am so excited about the summit and getting to hear your whole workshop, and I hope everybody else is too. It has been such a pleasure meeting and talking with you today, and I've reading your book, and so it's nice to have that face with the book, and I appreciate that. And just want to thank you and give you any opportunity to say anything else that you want to say to encourage people to come to the summit.
It is getting good answers, but I think it's also getting new and good questions.
Mhm.
And I think that's what I love about Presbyterian Mission Agency. That's what I love about the Matthew 25 vision and how it's been implemented. And that's what I'm excited about at the summit for myself too. I want to go and I want to hear from good, like experienced prophetic folks, but I don't want to just leave with some good answers. This is what I should do at my seminary. This is what I should do at my congregation. But I want to leave with new questions. I hadn't thought of it that way before. How can answering this hard question get me to like more faithful, more full answers to how I want to envision and enact God's love and justice in my world?
I think that's great. So our goal is we leave with more questions, less answers. I love that. I think it's exciting because they're going to ask the questions of different people when they go back. So the answers are just going to be great, and they're going to be thinking in their own church, in their own context, in their own community. What can we do different? What can we do to make God's world as inclusive as possible? So, yay! I'm excited. You're making me even more excited. So, thank you so much for being here, spending time with us, making us think, not just talking, but making us think and asking us questions. And we look forward to that as well when you're in Atlanta, or when we're in Atlanta. I guess you're already there. When we're in Atlanta. So thank you again. Folks, if you haven't registered, you need to go to the website listed below to learn more and register today. We will be exploring how the Matthew 25 principles are driving innovation, empowerment, and change. And you won't want to miss this chance to dialogue with and learn from Dr. Yu and others. We look forward to seeing you next time on Being Matthew 25. It'll be Wednesday, December 13th at noon Eastern Time. We will hear from another leader and speaker who will be featured at the Matthew 25 Summit. So until next time, go in peace.